Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In the next 35 minutes, we are going to go through today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition, picking up articles important for the civil service mains examination. The articles that we are going to take up for discussion has been tabulated in front of you and the time stamping for the same has been given in the description section. This is the lead article from page number 6. It is titled The Many Bright Spots on India's Innovation Horizon. This article basically discusses India's performance and the prospect for innovation. We will have a holistic discussion on the topic. We'll try and understand what is innovation, the importance of innovation, and the initiative that government has taken recently in the field of innovation. First of all, let us try and understand what is innovation. Innovation could either be a new idea or method, or it could be the new use of the existing ideas and method to do things in a simple, better manner. Innovation does not necessarily mean invention. The most famous example in this context is that of Mr. Henry Ford. He did not invent the car, he did not invent anything, but he innovated the production process through the assembly line. And this allowed Mr. Ford to make more cars than all other automakers combined. That indeed was a destructive innovation but did not involve any new invention. Similarly, another very prominent example in the present time is the recent development of the testing kit Feluda. Feluda, as we have covered in the previous DNS in detail and you would know, is a CRISPR-Cas9 technology-based detection kit for COVID-19 infection. It uses the CRISPR technology not for gene editing. CRISPR technology we read generally in the context of gene editing, but we know that CRISPR-Cas9 protein act as a scissor, and that scissoring mechanism of CRISPR-Cas9 is very intelligently used for diagnosing infection from COVID-19. The detailed mechanism of Feluda I hope you know. We have covered it in the previous DNS and this is an important topic for the coming mains for the science and tech portion. Similarly, Jam Trinity is another very important innovation in the socio-economic domain. But it didn't involve anything new. It was the smart and intelligent combinational use of Jandan account, Aadhaar number, and the mobile number and the use of mobile set. This has made possible the financial inclusion of millions of people. So innovation basically would mean a new idea or the intelligent use of the existing idea to make life better. And innovation can come from anywhere. We just need to have an open mind. India's frugal technology, frugal innovation is well known worldwide. And this temperament is developed from the ancient time through various scriptures. For example, in Rig Veda, there is a shlok, which means that let noble thoughts come to us from all sides. And this is what is required for innovation to prosper and make our life easier. The present state of innovation ecosystem in any nation can be captured by a single index, Global Innovation Index. And India's rank in Global Innovation Index has been continuously improving. India ranked 81 in 2005 and in 2019 index, India's rank is 52nd. This is the biggest jump in last 5 years by any major economy. And in Global Innovation Index, under the parameter of ICT service export, India's rank is number 1. India stood 4th in labor productivity growth. And in terms of number and quality of graduates in science and engineering, India stood 7th. In terms of companies' R&D expenditure, India's rank is not bad. India stood 15th. In the parameter of science and technology clusters, Bangalore, Mumbai and New Delhi have made to the top 100. You know where the weakness lies? The weakness lies in the R&D expenditure. Although India is at 15th spot in the global companies' R&D expenditure, but the overall R&D expenditure of the nation is quite low. And this has not increased in the last 3 decades. But other nations like China or the other Southeast Asian wonder nations like Singapore, South Korea, Malaysia, they have increased their R&D expenditure, both public and private, considerably. Innovation is very important in the growth story of a nation, as we have seen in case of Singapore, South Korea, Malaysia, and even in China. In 2016, UPSC asked a topic in the essay paper, innovation is the key determinant of economic growth and social welfare. And indeed, that is true. Innovation makes the social inclusion possible. Innovation makes available basic services to the poor, to the vulnerable, which are generally enjoyed by the well-off of the society. For example, the innovation of LED light, and further the innovation of cheap manufacturation of LED light that has made street lighting and also for the home appliances possible in the rural region. Innovation is a great equalizer. It gives opportunity to the small traders, the small entrepreneurs to compete even with the biggies. For example, as per the report of the World Bank, The Changing Nature of Work, many of the small startups selling at eBay in countries like Chile, Jordan, Peru, South Africa, they are very young and still at the initial phase of their development. Even in China, the startups which are dominating the Alibaba platform are very young. The service delivery apps like Swiggy, Zomato, Ola, Uber, they all are making possible for small businessmen, small traders, and even young entrepreneurs to participate in the economy in an effective manner. Innovation also has improved job creation in traditional areas, far away from the digital realm. For example, rural tourism, agricultural tourism, connecting textile with tourism. These ideas are coming up and becoming very popular in many states like Rajasthan, Tripura, Odisha. Even in governance in rural regions, innovation like converging Narega with other schemes for asset creation has done wonders, has improved the employability of Narega workers. Now semi-skilled and even skilled work is given under Manrega in the state of Tamil Nadu. Food processing is a very promising sector to provide employment in rural or semi-urban region. Similarly, the idea of defense procurement from MSME is very innovative and will support job creation in MSME sector. Innovation gives comparative advantage to any nation. For example, India gained comparative advantage in global trade in pharmaceutical sector. Pharmaceutical companies of India have captured the market in Asia and Africa and even in Europe. Strategic autonomy to nations also come from innovation. For example, IRNSS satellite system will give relative autonomy to India with respect to GPS system of US. Innovation in general increases production. It increases participation in economy. It increases the economic activity. And all of that will increase the GDP, the tax collection of the government, the fiscal health of the government, and overall well-being of people. Hence, it is rightly said that innovation is the key determinant of economic growth and social welfare. Now let's quickly see important recent steps taken by Government of India to culture and promote innovation. One of the most important initiative in this regard is the Atal Innovation Mission because it targets the school children. It is aimed at scaling up the startup incubation centers and promoting innovation culture among school children. There is a Nidhi program by Department of Science and Technology. Nidhi stands for National Initiative for Developing and Harnessing Innovation. The aim is setting up of incubators, seed fund, accelerators, and proof of concept grants for innovators and entrepreneurs. And for supporting the innovators and entrepreneurs, helping them develop the proof of concept, there is a program under the Nidhi program that is called as Prayas, promoting and accelerating youth and aspiring innovators and startups. Artificial intelligence is one area where many innovation is going to come in recent time. Niti Aayog in this regard has launched National Strategy for Artificial Intelligence. Department of Science and Technology has recently launched a mission in cyber physical system. Cyber physical system refers to those physical systems which are generally controlled, regulated, and monitored digitally. For example, the transmission line of electricity. If that is controlled and monitored digitally, for example, the circuit breakers in the line, then that will be called as a cyber physical system. Now with the merger of physical system and the digital world, cyber physical systems are going to be very common in our life. Government has promoted many innovation even in renewable energy sector. For example, development of solar panels under National Solar Mission. In space science, there have been many innovation from the cryogenic engine to the launch of missiles. One very important thing in this regard is the launch of student satellite Kalamsat in 2019. Many of the small satellites in form of cubes, they were contributed from the student community. Launch of Chandrayaan-2 was also very innovative because the gravitational pull of the planets were used, cutting the cost in the propulsion of the launch vehicle. Government has improved the banking sector by bringing the banks on our mobile. Innovation is also happening in the transport, and one of the prominent thing in this regard is electric vehicles. Lot of research work is going on in developing lithium-ion batteries and the charging technology that will do fast charging of the vehicles. Metro rail, if you think of, is a great innovation in field of transport. It does not take any space, it is built above the road, the traffic below the metro goes unhindered. It uses electricity, reduces the pollution. It uses simple technology like smart card that can be recharged over internet as well. And above all, it runs on time. Because of the effort of Government of India, there are around 15,000 startups in India and 5,000 are working in deep technology. India has done very well in improving the IPR ecosystem as well. India's scientific publications are growing at 14% per year. The global average, if you see, is 4%. But yes, lot needs to be desired, and most important thing in that regard would be increasing public expenditure in education and research. There is an article on page number 1, Wildlife Institute of India scientists anxious about potential funding cut. And the scientists at Wildlife Institute of India are anxious because recently Finance Ministry has done review of autonomous bodies. The expenditure department of the ministry has reviewed 194 autonomous bodies across 18 ministries. And the recommendation is that 109 bodies be merged into 26 and the government must disengage from 23 autonomous bodies. The list of these 23 autonomous bodies include prominent institutions like Wildlife Institute of India, Indian Institute of Forest Management, Indian Plywood Industries Research and Training Institute. This decision of merging institutions and disengaging from many seems to be in line with maximum governance, minimum government philosophy of the present government. Some of the recommendation is appreciable. For example, the ministry has recommended that Society of Integrated Coastal Management and National Center for Sustainable Coastal Management be merged because the nature of working of these two institutions are similar, so they can be merged. But recommendations like the working of Salim Ali Center of Ornithology and Natural History be made part of the functioning of Environment Ministry itself, or the recommendation like disengaging from Wildlife Institute of India is raising many questions. The director of Wildlife Institute of India has written to the Environment Ministry that disengagement will make the institute unviable, meaning the institute will not be able to exist, at least in the form in which it exists presently. See, the thing is, the main role of these autonomous bodies which are attached to departments and ministries is to act as an expert body, giving unbiased opinion. And these opinions are taken from both public sector and private sector. But the thing is, you cannot give unbiased opinion unless you are financially independent. When these institutions have the status of autonomous bodies, then grant in aid is given by the department and ministries for the function of these bodies. Although when these institutions act like expert bodies and give unbiased opinions, and they have clients from private sector, they have their own earning as well. But that is very meager. For example, in case of Wildlife Institute of India, only 10% of its expenditure is met by income coming from the client because they give services to private sector as well. For 90% of its expenditure, it has to depend on the grants given by the ministry. So the point is that this role of the institution to act as unbiased opinion generator, to help in informed policy formulation, that role cannot be performed if the institute is not part of the ministry. Because if the institute is not part of the ministry, it will not get grant in aid and there will be no financial independence. So the big question is there any value in giving money to these institutions? Is that adding burden on the government or it is adding more value to governance? To address the question of these institutions becoming unviable, the suggestion has come that the government must cut the funding gradually, 25% every year. And over the period of few years, the institution must become a deemed university. For example, Wildlife Institute of India can become an institute for the wildlife, engaged in teaching and research. And simultaneously, the central government can continue to access the expert advice of Wildlife Institute of India as a client, paying for the service. In that way, we can get the best of both the world. The institutions will not put financial burden on the government and still will continue to provide expert advice for policy formulation. But the counter argument is there are too few students and too few courses to be offered by the institute, and this won't qualify the institute as deemed university. In fact, twice University Grant Commission has rejected this offer of becoming a deemed university on these very grounds. So the inescapable fate of these institutions will be either to die or to become corrupt, take money to give favorable advices, as happened to many credit rating agencies. Because financial independence is crucial for autonomy. It's crucial to give free and fair advices. Now for the prelims examination, we'll discuss about autonomous bodies. See, autonomous bodies are set up whenever the need is felt. Whenever there's a need for an expert body or to discharge a technical function, the government set up autonomous bodies with independence and flexibility without day-to-day interference of the government. Such a body is formed. The body can be formed by the act of the parliament, the body can be formed by the resolution of the cabinet, the body can also be formed by individual ministries and departments. They are generally registered under Societies Registration Act, and in certain cases, they are also statutory as it can be formed by the parliament as well. Now you give me one example of a statutory autonomous body. They are very important as we have discussed because they perform specific functions in niche areas. They are important for informed policy formulation. One thing you have to note that the grants given to all these autonomous bodies are regulated by Ministry of Finance. That is why it is Ministry of Finance which is giving recommendations on working the merger and subsuming these autonomous bodies. These autonomous bodies are audited by CAG, but not necessarily by CAG. Many of the autonomous bodies are also audited by chartered accountants. You must also be aware that there is a committee chaired by Mr. Ratan Vatal to review the autonomous bodies. But the committee's final recommendation has not come yet. But the review committee was formed obviously because there have been many questions on working of autonomous bodies. First of all, these autonomous bodies are not held as accountable as the ministries and departments are held. But they should be held accountable because they work with the taxpayers' money. These autonomous bodies sometimes employ huge number of people. For example, Indian Council of Agricultural Research, an autonomous body under Ministry of Agriculture, employs around 17,000 people. But there is no uniformity in the recruitment process to these autonomous bodies. For centralized body, we have UPSC. For other posts, we have SSC. But there is no such body for the recruitment of these autonomous bodies. So there is no uniform recruitment rules or policy. Recruitment is done in ad hoc manner by the concerned institution itself. That also raises questions on the accountability of these institutions. Over and above that, all the autonomous bodies, as we have talked before, are not audited by CAG. Many are audited by chartered accountants. But in 2016, CAG had done exhaustive performance audit of autonomous scientific bodies. And CAG highlighted many gaps in the performance of these autonomous scientific bodies. The gap was huge because continuous monitoring is not there. And such audit for other autonomous bodies, for example, autonomous bodies working in the field of environment, that must be carried out as well. Without proper audit, without proper feedback, there will be less accountability, which is one of the pillar of democracy. And in absence of accountability, performance cannot be ensured. There is a news article on page number 10. Quad group should eventually become formalized. Biegun. US Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun has said that eventually the Quad group countries, India, US, Japan and Australia, should become more formalized. Formalizing Quad means there has to be a headquarter, a secretariat, office bearers, rule book, just like other organizations like SCO or NATO for that matter. Then the obvious question to be asked is, why so far it has not been formalized? So far, Quad or Quadrilateral Security Group has been an informal group because there were reservations from the side of US, also from side of India to formalize it and form a concrete geostrategic security group. But things seems to be changing. Recently, Defense Ministry of India has announced that Australia will join the other three Quad countries, US, India and Japan, in the Malabar naval exercise. Australia put out its request in 2017 when the Quad 2.0 was formed that it wants to participate in the Malabar group. But India had reservations, mostly because of vehement opposition from China. But now everyone seems to be ready to take it forward in a bold manner, no matter what China's or Russia's reservation would be. There is this one more small related point. South Korea was being speculated to participate in Quad or the extended form of Quad or Quad Plus, but now it has been clarified by the Deputy Secretary of State of US that no such policy to expand the Quad is in the offing presently. See, Quad has become very important in India's geopolitical strategy, mostly to counter China. For the coming mains examination, I feel it's a very important topic from international relation that can be asked in the exam. Quad has been covered multiple times in the DNS previously in detail, but since the topic is so important, I'll take you through the important things once again. Quadrilateral Security Group, which is informally called as Quad, was formed in the backdrop of tsunami of 2004. When the situation is tough, obviously cooperation is more. During the relief measures that were being carried out by India after tsunami of 2004, Australia, US and Japan were cooperating with India. Shortly after that, this idea of Indo-Pacific as a larger maritime strategic community was developed. Then in 2007, Japan, Australia and Singapore joined the military exercise with India and US. So the cooperation was being made more holistic, and the purpose of this military exercise was preparedness for disaster and security emergencies. But Beijing and Moscow got rattled. They got very nervous on seeing this cooperation among India, Japan, Australia and US, especially because it was in the Indo-Pacific region. They termed it an attempt to build an Asian NATO. Here is a very important geostrategic question for you. Quad was still in its initial stage, and how the cooperation will develop, it was still not known. The purpose of Quad was not known. Quad was not formalized. Then why was Russia, and even more so China, got rattled so very early? Because this is still 2007-8. The Quad had the stated purpose of cooperating mostly for disaster management and to provide a general security to the region. No statement by no leader whatsoever was made against China or Russia. In fact, they were very cautious on this. Then why do you think China was so rattled? In hindsight now, when we see the events, now we realize that in China, the great plan was going on. China was busy in shipbuilding. China was busy making stealth technology for oceanic surveillance. And this was also the time when global recession came in 2008. So this was an opportunity for China to expand its aggressive activities around South China Sea. Additionally, US has never seen China as its adversary. Rather, during the Cold War and even after that, US was dependent on China to counter Russia, just like US is dependent on India now to counter China. And incidentally, at that time, US was trying to gain China's support to get North Korea sit on table and negotiate. And China used this opportunity and got the Quad exercise in 2008 cancelled. US did it. US asked Australia to pull out of the exercise. Australia, being a good boy, pulled out. And the Quad was shelved for the next decade. So even before getting formalized and concretized, the idea was thrown into the back burner. But after a decade, things changed considerably. It was 2017. US was staring at trade war with China. The Doklam incident between India and China already has happened. Now China is more aggressive and hardened in its stand. So reassessment of the challenge from China was done by US and India and Japan and Australia. And finally, Quad was formed again as Quad 2.0 in 2017. And ever since, Australia was requesting to join Exercise Malabar, but India was not ready to allow it. Recently, Defence Ministry has said that Australia will join the next Malabar exercise. That completes the full circle, from being ambivalent to bold and ambitious. India is at the verge of making very important decision in the geopolitical realm. Rather, India seems to have taken that decision already. Presently, there is a trilemma in the geopolitical strategy for India. There are three ways India can go about taking up its geopolitical strategy and counter China. One is to revert to the traditional positions of non-alignment, where India can use Russia to manage China. The other is to have multi-alignment, inviting middle powers such as European Union, UK, France, Russia, even Brazil, UAE and South Africa to Indo-Pacific strategy of India. The third is to go closer to the coalition of China's adversaries. Who are they? They are US, they are Japan, and more recently, that includes Australia as well. India has been toying this idea of going closer to the adversaries of China and form an anti-China bloc. But throughout in the history, India has remained mostly non-aligned or multi-aligned, but always has maintained strategic autonomy in making international decisions. There are two problems in going very close to US against China and forming and formalizing Quad. First problem is strategic autonomy of India will come into question, because when you are part of the group, you have to go by the decision of the group. That's how it works. Secondly, US pulled out of Quad in 2008. If you look at other decisions of US seems to be pulling out of global affairs. For example, in Afghanistan, US has pulled out of UNHRC. US has pulled out of Global Compact on Migration. US has also pulled out of TPP. When US seems to be shutting away from the global affairs, it will not be very wise to align with US because of the issue of reliability. That is why at this juncture, this issue of Quad becomes very, very important, that India has to choose very, very wisely for the strategic future. There is an article on page number 13, Amendment Needs Referendum. This is in the context of 20th Constitutional Amendment that Sri Lanka is going to do. In the pre-legislative judicial review, the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka has cleared the deck for the passage of the amendment. However, it has identified 4 clauses that will require referendum, and that includes exempting the president from being answerable to parliament and providing him immunity from lawsuits. Because this unbridled power will take away accountability from the post of president and kind of make president a sovereign power. But in democracy, people are sovereign. So endowing president with this kind of power will necessarily require a referendum. There are 2 things that I would like to bring your attention to. Number 1 is the pre-legislative judicial scrutiny. If you understand how judicial review works in India, the Supreme Court or higher judiciary does not get into scrutinizing a bill. Judicial review is done only when the bill is passed by the parliament and becomes an act. If you remember, Petitions were filed for CAB, Citizenship Amendment Bill. Petitions were accepted by the Supreme Court, but Supreme Court began the proceeding only once the bill was passed and it became CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act. But this is not to suggest that judiciary does not take preemptive action. Many a time Supreme Court and High Court provides protection against arrest to individuals. Ordinarily, the court does not interfere with the working of the legislature, and only once the scrutiny from the parliament, for example from the standing committee, etc., that is done and the bill is given the shape in the form of the act, only then the judicial review is done. But in Sri Lanka and many other democracies, the Supreme Court gives observation even on the draft of the bill. But even if such mechanism is not present in India or that is not used by the court, still strong mechanism of pre-legislative consultation is there in India. You must think and tell me. If you don't know, you must find out what are the important pre-legislative consultation mechanism in India. The second aspect about this news is the 20th constitutional amendment that Sri Lanka is going to take. See, the 20th constitutional amendment is brought to reverse the 19th constitutional amendment, which was brought by the previous dispensation. The aim of the 19th constitutional amendment was to give more independence to the constitutional bodies, to various statutory commissions, for example, the Election Commission, the Commission for Appointments. The purpose was also to restrict the power of the Prime Minister. The overall aim was to make the political ecosystem more democratic. So the 20th constitutional amendment is not only going to reverse 19th constitutional amendment, but it will have far-reaching effect. The power centralization that will come back, this time not in the hand of Prime Minister, but in the hand of the President, will affect the 13th constitutional amendment of Sri Lanka as well. And it is this 13th constitutional amendment which is of crucial interest for India. 13th constitutional amendment was brought about as the outcome of Indo-Sri Lanka Accord of 1987. The most important feature of 13th constitutional amendment was devolution of power to the provincial councils. 9 provincial councils was to establish in Sri Lanka, and powers such as policing, land, education, health, all of that will be given to the provincial councils. The purpose of creating this provincial council was to give some amount of powers locally in the hands of Tamil population, because they were not represented in the central leadership. And you know about the Tamil Sinhala conflict going on in Sri Lanka. Without representation in the government, the Tamil population of Sri Lanka felt cut off, marginalized, and they could not protect themselves from violence and suppression. So this devolution of power through 13th Amendment was seen as the long-term viable solution to the Tamil Sinhalese conflict problem in Sri Lanka. But this was not acceptable to the hardliners in the Buddhist population of Sri Lanka. And effectively, this was never implemented. The reason for that was centralization of power in the hands of the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. Before 19th Amendment was done, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka was a very powerful man. He can effectively veto everything. So provincial councils have always been crippled and they never achieved the stated goal. But 19th Amendment gave some hope, which is now being reversed by the 20th Amendment. When we see all these, coupling it with other developments happening in Sri Lanka, for example, constitution of an expert committee to draft an entirely new constitution for Sri Lanka, then questions are raised as to what is the intention of the government of Sri Lanka. Yesterday, you also must have read about the biopic 800 of Muthaiya Muralidharan, the celebrated cricketer of Sri Lanka. This was cancelled because an Indian Tamil actor was to play the lead role in the biopic. Once the poster for the film was out, there were protests from various quarters. Even the mainstream political parties started persuading the actor to pull off. The Tamil Sinhala issue in Sri Lanka always has been a hot topic during elections in Tamil Nadu. It also has been an uncomfortable issue in the bilateral relationship of India and Sri Lanka. Recently, during the visit of Sri Lankan Prime Minister, Indian Prime Minister Modi has taken up the issue yet again. It's a big googly in the geostrategic positioning of India because Sri Lanka, under the present leadership, seems to be going close to China. It is to be seen how India will take up the issue of Tamil rights in Sri Lanka on a hard ground without pushing Sri Lanka further closer to China. This article is from page number 1. It is titled Government Increases Poll Spend Ceiling by 10%. See, recently Election Commission recommended a 10% increase in the expenditure for all elections to be held during COVID-19 pandemic. This recommendation was in cognizance of the problem that the candidates may face while campaigning under the various COVID-19 protocol that has been laid by the Election Commission. Law Ministry accepted the recommendation of Election Commission and accordingly increased the expense limit for the parliamentary and the assembly election by 10%. Previously, for the Lok Sabha election campaign, the limit was Rs 70 lakhs. That now has been increased to 77 lakh. But in some states like Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh and some UTs, the limit was Rs 54 lakh. That now has been increased to Rs 59 lakh. Similarly, for the state assembly elections, in some states the limit was Rs 28 lakh. In some of the smaller states it was Rs 20 lakh. That now has been increased to Rs 30.8 lakh and Rs 22 lakh respectively. What you have to know here are these. Number 1, the expenditure limit is specified under Rule 90 of Conduct of Election Rules 1961. And any change requires Law Ministry's approval. So the changes are recommended by the Election Commission, but final approval comes from Law Ministry. Political funding is a big issue, and because of absence of political funding by right channel, criminalization of politics is happening. According to Association for Democratic Reforms report, 69% of income of political parties were from unknown sources. Political parties do not comply with RTI Act. Political parties are exempted from RTI Act rather. Law Commission in its 255th report observed that opacity in political funding results in lobbying and capture of government by big donors. There are other serious issues in political funding. For instance, according to the recent numbers released by the Election Commission, 95% of electoral bonds went to the ruling party. Funding to political parties also act as means to channelize black money, because Election Commission report shows that hundreds of political parties are formed just 2 months before election. There is a very interesting book, When Crime Plays, by Milan Vaishnav. In this book, he very beautifully explains how political parties use criminals, how political parties use black sources of money for funding, and then criminals start entering into politics. So the issue of political funding is very closely and symbiotically related with the issue of criminalization of politics. In this regard, there is a very good suggestion given by former Chief Election Commissioner S.Y. Qureshi. He is suggesting establishment of National Electoral Fund to which all donors can contribute, and the funds will be allocated to political parties in proportion to the votes that they get. So the expenditure limit in the campaigning has been increased, that's okay, but the sources of expenditure must also be checked. Now let us do question for the day. Yesterday's question was, consider the following statements. Sustainable Development Goals SDG 3.3 adopted by member countries of the United Nations in 2015 set a target of ending the epidemics of AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria by 2040. This is incorrect because the target was set to be achieved by 2030. The second statement was, National AIDS Control Organization is a department under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. You have to read this statement very carefully because National AIDS Control Organization is a division under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, not a department. So that is also an incorrect statement. Answer would be option D. Today's question is this. Consider the following statements. Autonomous bodies under a ministry can be statutory. Second statement is, there is a committee for review of autonomous bodies chaired by Ratan Vittal. The third statement is, all autonomous bodies are audited by CAG. Select the correct option, 1 only, 1 and 2 only, 1 and 3 only, or all of the above.